the rush to get out of Afghanistan. As U.S. and NATO troops quickly end their mission, it is clear to everyone that practically everyone who can is trying to leave the country. At the moment, there appear to be three groups of Afghans, the vast majority of the people who have no choice but to stay put and await the future. The second group, the only one whose number is really swelling, are those fleeing the country. Iranian news media report thousands upon thousands of Afghans are crossing the border every day. And then there is the smallest group, the translators and interpreters who worked side by side with allied troops, some only for a few months, some for many years. Now, there are thousands of them, and they want to get out, most applying for visas to the United States. The select ones who have received the green light are being flown out of the country as we speak. We have this report.
We meet Ahmad somewhere near New York City. A former contractor and interpreter of the U.S. Army, he found safety in America. Fearing reprisals, Ahmad does not want to be identified. His brother, who is still in Afghanistan, is facing an uncertain future.
Those individuals are now in a lot of risk. They worked for the military. Now, if they are left behind, the Taliban will kill them. It's a stress to check and see if your loved ones are alive or they are dead. When the phone rings and no one answers, it's a big pain.
America's longest war began in 2001 when it invaded Afghanistan following the attacks of 9/11. As the troops now leave, 18,000 former contractors are being left without protection from the Taliban. The U.S. promised them special immigrant visas and to relocate them while their applications are being processed. But time is running out.
It doesn't make me happy to see that I spent 11 years of hard work for the U.S. Army, and then I had to wait for 4 years to get my visa. I beg to the U.S. government that just fulfill your promise and don't let the people die.
Volunteer Jeff Swartz helped Ahmad and other Afghan families settle in the United States. He says the U.S. has a moral obligation to protect those who helped its troops.
This is a country that has landed a rover on Mars. And we're sitting here telling that there's a process that has to be followed, and we can't get 18,000 human beings whose lives are at risk.
Ahmad is lucky he applied for his visa early. At the current rate, his brother might get his approved within 3 years, long after the U.S. Army has left Afghanistan.
And for more, I'm joined tonight by Adam Weinstein. He's a research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He's an expert on Afghanistan, where he also served as a U.S. Marine. He joins me tonight from Washington, D.C. And Imran Firaz. He is an Austrian-Afghan journalist and author. He joins me tonight from Stuttgart here in Germany. To both of you gentlemen, it's good to have you on the program. Imran, let me start with you. Is there a future for people like those interpreters in Afghanistan?
First of all, thanks for having me. I think it's really difficult to say if they have a positive future there. I mean, it's not just about interpreters who are still stuck in Afghanistan, but also many other people, you know, the NATO personnel that was built and recruited during the last 20 years all over the country is rather big. And many of them are stuck because of, you know, bureaucratic issues that are not really reasonable if you know the realities on the ground. I have just been busy with a case of an Afghan who used to work with the German Bundeswehr. He was not an interpreter, but he was responsible for the whole telecommunication of the troops, and he regularly worked with the troops every day for years. But now they are not interested in him because he did not have a direct contract with the troops. He worked for a private firm, and the private firm was working for the troops. But, you know, on the ground, for the Taliban and other militants who hunt down such people, this doesn't make a real difference.
So he has to stay in Afghanistan then?
Yes, exactly. The German foreign ministry literally said that they are not interested in his case because he did not have a direct contract. So he should take care of himself privately. It's not their business.
Okay, Adam, let me come to you. The United States has pledged to evacuate these translators, interpreters with their families, and that is taking place. At the same time, it looks a little bit like it's an afterthought. Is it?
Well, thanks for having me. I'd have to say it is a bit of an afterthought because there was a lot of back and forth over the withdrawal decision itself. And the cost of that indecisiveness across both the Trump and Biden administrations, frankly, and especially in the last few months, was that there wasn't enough planning about these contingencies like the SIV applicants. And it might even be the case that the Pentagon was dragging its feet a bit about a withdrawal decision that it didn't want to make. That being said, all bureaucratic processes are tedious and complex. And I think what's necessary here is for the Biden administration to cut through the red tape, not allow bureaucracy to be used as an excuse for allowing those who directly supported us to be killed, and simply get these people out. It's a task that is within the control of the United States. Most conditions in Afghanistan are not in the control of the United States, but getting the SIV applicants out, those people who helped us directly, is something that is very much in our control, and it should be done with speed and dispatch.
Yeah, and we know that is happening now. They're being brought to Virginia while their visa applications are being processed. Imran, for Afghans, does your opinion of the U.S. withdrawal, does it depend on who you are and where you are?
Yes, in my experience, it does. I think what we often hear in many Western media reports is that people are concerned. And of course, many people are concerned about what is happening. But what I experienced on the ground is that it's often very different and opinions differ from each other. It's often very heterogenic. Also, you have to consider that the life of someone who lives in Kabul, in the capital, is very different than the life of someone who lives in rural Afghanistan, like, in northern Baghlan province or in northeastern Kunar province. And you hear a lot of different opinions about the withdrawal. And I think that's what's going on over there.
Well, Imran, what do you hear? Do people think that a return of the Taliban to power, do they think that's now inevitable?
In Kabul, for example, you hear people who, of course, fear such a return. They think that a scenario like in 1992, when the communist regime was toppled by the Mujahideen, would take place again. And then you have civil war and everything. In my opinion, you already have civil war in Afghanistan if you consider what is going on all over the country. But, there are other regions that have suffered from the American occupation, for example, from airstrikes, drone strikes, night raids. And if you talk to these people, they are rather happy that the Americans leave. That's what was my experience, for example, during my last reporting trip in some of the areas that I visited. And I think that a lot of Afghans also know that, foreign occupiers, foreign military forces are not a constant solution to solve the conflict in their country.
Yeah, well, they've had plenty of experience with foreign occupiers, that is for sure. Adam, how do you see this? Is it inevitable that the Taliban return to power, or is that a message that the Taliban is trying to push?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. And look, you introduced me as an expert on Afghanistan, and that's very flattering. I don't really consider myself one, and I think there's very few genuine Afghanistan experts in the world. And the reason I say that is predictions about the political trajectory of Afghanistan from anyone should always come with a grain of salt because they oftentimes are wrong. I think that the Taliban are in an ascendant posture right now, and they've certainly taken a lot of districts. We do have to remember that the ANDSF often retake strategic districts. The Taliban don't have enough manpower to hold all of these districts permanently. Many of these outposts that the ANDSF had shouldn't really have existed to begin with. They were simply points on a map that could, be pointed to and create the illusion of government control over an area, but in reality, that outpost was on a road that was controlled by the Taliban and couldn't be resupplied. And the reason the Afghan soldiers surrendered might have been to lack of supplies or lack of ammunition. And so I think the ANDSF, or the Afghan security forces, are going to have to reimagine the way they fight without U.S. air support and without the logistical support of the U.S. military machine. And they're going to have to become more mobile and coalesce around population centers. And of course, these are recommendations that U.S. advisors have told the Ghani administration for some time now, and told the Afghan government in general for years. But there was a lack of political will to institute these reforms because it was bad optics, or it might look like the Afghan government was giving up territory. But now there's not time to consider optics. The Afghan government has to focus on keeping territory and regaining strategic territory. And ultimately, the only real solution to what could be described as a civil war with very powerful third-party intermediaries or interveners, such as Pakistan and the United States, is a political settlement between Afghans. And at some point, the government and the Taliban are going to have to meet each other halfway, or else what I think we're going to see is an ever-intensifying civil war. But I do not think a Taliban-dominated Afghanistan is inevitable at this moment.
Okay, I mean, well, that's the future. Let's talk a little bit about the past, Adam. You served as a Marine in Afghanistan, and you've said that you thought your task was nation building. I want you to take a listen to what U.S. President Biden, what he said recently about the mission in Afghanistan.
We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country.
So, Adam, the question is, did the U.S. stay too long in Afghanistan, or should it never have been there in the first place?
Well, I think the United States was in a position where it had to respond to 9/11, but that response could have been far more limited and focused on counterterrorism than what it became. And President Biden is correct when he says that the original intent and the original authorization by Congress, for that matter, was not to engage in nation-building activities, but there was a mission creep, and the mission creep became larger and larger to justify a longer U.S. presence to the American people and to the world.
Imran, do you agree? Mission creep?
Yeah, I think Adam hinted towards some really important points regarding the political will of the Afghan national forces who are fighting on the ground. I think that it's not just about the political will, it's about the fact that the Afghan military is a deeply corrupt institution that has a lot of problems. I mean, what Adam described partly, you could go a bit deeper and describe, for example, the so-called ghost soldiers that existed all over the country. Soldiers who just existed on the paper, while high-ranking military officials literally stole the salaries of these people to make themselves rich. And in March, I visited, a couple of Afghan soldiers fighting against the Taliban in Kunar province. And if you see these people, you see what the problem is. They literally don't have anything and are just on themselves. Yeah. And I think regarding the nation building issue, it's not just about what Joe Biden said recently. From the very beginning, the whole intervention was a failure because the Americans and their allies started to work with very questionable people on the ground in Afghanistan, warlords, drug barons, and deeply corrupt politicians who all of them, served in the government of Hamid Karzai, and others are still having high-ranking positions. And with such people, it was very, very difficult from the very beginning to get proper results.
Well, I've got about a minute left, so let me ask both of you, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Imran, and then I'll hear from you, Adam. What's going to be the legacy of the U.S. presence in Afghanistan? Imran, you first.
I think the legacy of the U.S. presence is that not a single goal of the U.S. intervention was actually reached. High-ranking terrorists, militant leaders like Osama bin Laden, Mohammed Mullah Omar of the Taliban, all of them were not hit by the so-called precise operations of the Americans. Some of them even died naturally. Instead, many other people were killed, and dozens of people, thousands of people on the ground were radicalized, joined the Taliban, instead of, solving the terror problem in Afghanistan. We just see that much more terrorism has been created.
Adam, what about you?
The legacy is going to be that the United States should think twice about engaging in interventions abroad, because Afghanistan has demonstrated that the U.S. military cannot shape conditions on the ground. But perhaps a more important legacy is, what is the legacy going to be for Afghans? And ultimately, are the Taliban and the Afghan government going to be able to meet each other halfway and come up with a political settlement? And the United States might be able to revise its legacy if it remains engaged economically and diplomatically, even after U.S. boots leave the ground in Afghanistan. In fact, this is going to be a real test for whether the United States actually values diplomacy when it is decoupled from military intervention abroad.
Adam Weinstein, a research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and a former U.S. Marine, and Imran Firaz, an Austrian-Afghan journalist and author. To both of you gentlemen, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.